In a sixth-grade classroom tucked inside Lyndale Prep, one sentence written in a child's careful hand would shatter the illusion of normal. My mom works at the White House. 11-year-old Layla Monroe didn't expect applause, just to be believed. But in a room where appearances spoke louder than truth, her honesty became a punchline. As skeptical eyes turned sharp and laughter took shape, Layla's quiet world tilted. What happens when a simple truth challenges silent prejudice? Stay close, because this story is about to ask everyone in that room who they really are. Under the soft hum of the classroom heater, Layla Monroe sat at her desk, fingers poised over her pencil, yet unmoving. Outside, bare trees swayed in the chill December breeze that rolled through Silver Spring like a breath held too long. The sun filtered through the frosted windows of Lyndale Preparatory Academy, casting long streaks of light across the tiled floor. Christmas garlands hung sparsely from door frames, more duty than joy, much like everything else at this stern old school. The assignment was simple. Write about what your parent does for a living. But simplicity didn't mean ease. Lala glanced sideways at Emily Cho, her best friend, who was already halfway down her page. Her handwriting was bold, confident. She whispered, "I'm writing about my dad's lab. He's building a robot that can sort recycling by smell." Lala smiled faintly, then turned back to her blank page. "My mom works at the White House." The pencil tip hovered above the paper. She hesitated. That single sentence felt heavier than the morning fog outside. Not because it wasn't true, because it was. But truth didn't always land gently, especially when it came from someone like her. Someone quiet. Someone black. Her mother's voice surfaced in her mind, soft but unwavering. "Speak your truth, but not everyone will be ready to hear it." Layla pressed her lips together and began to write. She completed the sentence, and then another, but her fingers stiffened as she sensed movement in the room. Miss Karen Millstone had begun walking down the aisles, collecting the assignments, one by one. The teacher's heels clicked against the polished floor, deliberate and echoing. Miss Millstone, with her ash-blonde bob and sharply tailored blazer, was the kind of educator who ran her classroom like a courtroom, calm, controlled, and rarely questioned. When she reached Layla's desk, she took the paper silently. Layla looked up, just briefly. Their eyes met. Miss Millstone's gaze flicked to the first line, her brow arched slightly. "The White House?" she said, voice low but pointed. Layla felt her classmates stir around her. Chairs creaked. Someone stopped chewing their pencil. Emily shot her a look, curious but not mocking. Ms. Millstone's smile was tight, almost polite. "Well, that's creative," she said, folding the paper once before sliding it under her clipboard. "We'll talk about facts tomorrow." Then she turned, the click of her heels resuming like a gavel dropping. Layla stared after her, her breath caught somewhere in her chest. The classroom had not returned to its usual rhythm. It had only grown quieter. Sunlight streamed in through the high windows, landing on Ms. Millstone's shoulder and casting a long shadow across her desk. It reached across the polished wood to Layla's seat, sharp, dividing. Emily nudged her foot under the table, a silent gesture. Layla didn't move. She looked down at the lined paper before her. The teacher hadn't even read past the first sentence. Slowly, she reached into her pencil pouch, drew out a clean sheet, and placed it in front of her. With a steady hand, she began to rewrite. "My mom works at the White House." Laughter bubbled in the classroom, not joyful, but sharp and amused, and it was all aimed at Layla. She stood at the front of room 6A, palms pressed tightly against the hem of her navy sweater, knuckles pale. The buzz of the overhead lights hummed above her, blending with the faint whir of the heater and the clatter of restless chairs. Outside, the gray afternoon pressed against the windows like a held breath. Inside, the air was brighter but colder, made harsher by the sterile white glow of the neon panels. Emily had warned her earlier, while they were still at their lockers, her voice soft and quick. "She's gonna call on you first. You know that, right?" Layla had nodded without answering. And now here she was, standing like a trial witness rather than a student, facing 30 pairs of eyes, and one pair more scrutinizing than the rest. Miss Karen Millstone stood just to the left of the whiteboard, her arms gently folded, one hand resting on the edge of her desk. Her posture wasn't confrontational, but it wasn't neutral either. It was stage-ready. "Layla," she said, her tone light, feigning curiosity, "why don't you go first?" Layla cleared her throat, kept her gaze just above the row of faces, and said, "My mom works as an advisor at the White House." There was a beat of silence. Then a breathy chuckle from the back row. Ms. Millstone tilted her head, lips curving ever so slightly. "Does she now?" Layla opened her mouth to clarify, but before she could, Tyler Whitmore leaned back in his chair and grinned broadly. "Maybe she cleans the floors," he said, loud enough to carry. A ripple of laughter spread instantly. Some kids looked around nervously before joining in. Others didn't hesitate. Lila's hands clenched at her sides. She didn't flinch, didn't cry. She just stood still, the heat rising slowly from her chest to her ears. Her eyes flicked toward Ms. Millstone. The teacher did not react to Tyler's comment. She simply turned back toward Layla, her voice now dipped in something icier. "Let's stick to facts, Layla," she said, smooth as glass. Emily, sitting 3 desks from the front, didn't laugh. She looked down at her notebook, then back at Layla with quiet, urgent support in her eyes. Layla blinked slowly, her expression unreadable. "I am," she said evenly. Ms. Millstone raised one brow, unconvinced. "I think it's important not to exaggerate. Wouldn't you agree?" There it was, delivered like a final ruling. Layla's throat was dry. She could feel every beat of her heart in her chest, a steady, quiet drum against the silence that had replaced the laughter. She walked back to her seat. Each step seemed louder than it should have. Behind her, the murmurs restarted, low and simmering. Tyler whispered something she didn't catch. Someone giggled. Karen didn't stop them. Layla sat down and looked straight ahead, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Emily leaned over, her voice barely audible. "They wouldn't dare if your mom were here." Layla sat on the edge of her bed, debating whether telling the truth had ever been worth it. Snow whispered softly outside, brushing the windows in thin white streaks. Inside her room, the air was still, heavy with the kind of quiet that made her think too loudly. Her feet barely touched the plush rug. Her fingers twisted the drawstrings of her hoodie, tight, then loose, then tight again. On her desk across the room, a framed photo leaned awkwardly to one side. In it, her mother stood near the president during a staff event at the Rose Garden, mid-laugh, one hand resting on a folder. A yellow sticky note now covered half her face. Layla had stuck it there weeks ago when a friend came over. It read, "Do not share publicly." She hated that note. Her phone buzzed once. "Emily, Emily, you good? Just say the word and we burn down 6A. Figuratively." Layla let a smile flicker and fade just as fast. She typed, "Wish I could burn just one person's tone of voice," then locked the screen. The door creaked open. Danica Monroe stepped in with the unhurried grace of someone who'd spent the past 10 hours making decisions that impacted national policy. Her laptop, still open, glowed faint blue on the hallway table behind her. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. Layla didn't answer at first. She just stared at the shadow her knees cast on the floor. Then, quietly, they laughed. Danica walked over, sat on the bed beside her without touching her. "Because of what you wrote?" Layla nodded. "Because of who I said you are." A long pause followed. The only sound was the faint hum of the heating vent and the soft creak of the Christmas tree lights blinking in the corner. Danica's gaze moved to the desk. "Did you tell them the truth?" "I did," Layla's voice cracked. "I said you work at the White House, as an advisor. And Ms. Millstone," she swallowed. "She acted like I made it up." Danica didn't speak. She reached down and loosened one boot, then the other, setting them neatly beside the bed. Finally, she turned to her daughter. "What would you like me to do?" she asked simply. The question undid Layla. She blinked fast, once, twice, then looked away. "I want you to come, just once, for Parents' Day." Danica took that in without a word, no nod, no sigh. She just looked at her daughter, long and deep and steady. "I thought we agreed," she began, but then stopped. Not because she changed her mind, but because she understood something had changed in Layla. At that same moment, across town, Karen Millstone's fingers hovered over her keyboard. The email she had composed was crisp and short. Subject, Student Assignment Concerns. To Principal Donahue, Body. Some students seem encouraged to fabricate details about their parents' professions. I believe clarification and perhaps discretion would benefit classroom harmony. She hit send. Back in Layla's room, Danica finally closed her laptop with a soft click. "Tell your teacher I'll be there." Layla looked up, a knot in her chest loosening and tightening at the same time. Her shoulders sagged with the weight of things she couldn't quite name. "She's going to lose it," she whispered, and she wasn't sure whether she meant Ms. Millstone or herself. The hallway fell into a hush as Danica Monroe stepped through the double doors of Lyndale Prep, heels quiet, presence thunderous. Rain speckled the tall windows of the second-floor corridor, drawing thin lines like veins across the frosted glass. Inside, voices that had buzzed moments earlier. Parents chatting, students whispering, staff nodding politely, tapered into silence. A few heads turned first, then more followed, as Danica moved past the crowd with composed certainty. Her coat, a tailored navy wool, brushed against the hem of her slacks, and the gleam of her White House identification badge caught the fluorescent light. Layla stood just outside room 6A, back pressed to the wall, trying to breathe. Her palms were damp. She could hear Tyler Whitmore's voice a few feet away, louder than necessary, saying something about his dad's golf handicap. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Not yet. Inside the classroom, Karen Millstone adjusted the sleeves of her maroon cardigan and rearranged the desk name tags for the third time. She glanced at the clock. "Did your mother decide not to attend after all?" she asked, her tone measured, vaguely amused. Layla's mouth opened, but before she could form a word, the door creaked. Danica stepped in. For a moment, the room was soundless, the kind of silence that wrapped around your ears and made every heartbeat feel public. Danica's smile was small, polite. She lifted her ID badge toward Karen. "Good morning, Danica Monroe." Karen blinked as if sunlight had just hit her square in the eyes. "Ms. Monroe, welcome," she said, voice pitched a shade too high. Layla watched from her desk, heart rattling. Her fingers had been clenched around her pencil so tightly she hadn't noticed the slight cramp until now. She loosened her grip. The pencil rolled across the desk and dropped with a clatter. No one looked her way. Whispers floated like dust through the room. "That's her? She really works at the White House?" "She's gorgeous." Karen gestured stiffly toward the front of the class. "We were just about to begin." "Perfect," Danica replied. She moved smoothly toward the podium, pausing only when Principal Wallace appeared at the door, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Oh, Ms. Monroe," he stammered. "A pleasure. Would you, perhaps, like to say a few words?" Danica nodded once. Then she faced the class. Layla held her breath. "I was told this was a day for parents to speak about what they do," Danica began, her tone steady, measured. "Most of what I do can't be shared in great detail, but I'll tell you this. My work requires me to listen, to people, to systems, to silences. Listening is what makes good policy." Karen sat rigid in her chair, arms folded tightly, expression unreadable. "It's easy," Danica continued, eyes sweeping the room, "to dismiss quiet voices until they carry national weight." A murmur rolled through the class. Emily leaned slightly forward, eyes wide. Tyler looked like he wanted to shrink behind his monogrammed sweater. Danica rested her hands lightly on the desk. "Today, I came not as a senior advisor. I came as Layla's mother." She paused. "Let it settle. I listen for a living. Today I came to speak, because my daughter wasn't heard." Karen didn't move. Her face had drained of color. Layla stared straight ahead, hands still now, resting openly on her desk. The ache in her chest didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. Something had shifted. Something irreversible. Emails flew. Meetings were scheduled. And for once, the whispers in the teacher's lounge weren't about students. The Monday morning air inside Lyndale Prep carried a strange stillness. The usual rhythm, the tap of shoes, the slamming of lockers, the faint murmur of students greeting each other, was there, but quieter, more cautious. Teachers offered tight-lipped smiles. Conversations stalled mid-sentence when certain people walked by. Layla noticed it as soon as she stepped through the main doors. The difference wasn't loud. It was in the way Ms. Lopez greeted her with a nod instead of a glance, and how her homeroom desk, usually the one on the edge, had been pulled slightly closer to the circle for the group discussion. Karen Millstone, for her part, walked into class with her hair pulled tighter than usual and her lesson plan gripped in one hand. Her voice stumbled through the morning routine, and when she asked for reflections on the previous week's assignment, she avoided Layla's side of the room entirely. At recess, Emily found her by the lockers. "You okay?" she asked, leaning casually beside her. Layla shrugged. "I guess." Emily smiled, but it was sharper than before. "Well, I'm not." She said nothing more. But later, during social studies, when the discussion turned to current events and truth in media, Emily raised her hand. "I think we need to be careful," she said, her tone clear, unwavering. "Assuming someone lies because of how they look, that's dangerous. That's how bias starts." The class stilled. Karen didn't respond right away. She blinked once, twice, then resumed the lesson with no comment. By lunch, the rumor had made its way through most of the 6th grade. "That lady really works with the president? Her mom was on TV last night, I think. I heard Karen got called in." Layla sat beside Emily, who now seemed to walk with a new sense of purpose. Even students who laughed the week before now approached with awkward half-smiles, as if rewriting the script in their heads. That afternoon, over the intercom, Principal Wallace's voice came through. "This Friday, we'll be hosting an open forum on diversity, equity, and inclusion. All families are welcome. We encourage thoughtful participation." Layla glanced at Emily. Emily raised an eyebrow and mouthed, "Well, well." Later that day, whispers followed Karen down the hall. She walked straighter than ever, but her gaze didn't linger. She passed Wallace in the front office and nodded stiffly. He didn't return the gesture. After class, Wallace approached her desk. "Ms. Millstone, we'll need you to join us Wednesday afternoon. The board would like a full review of recent classroom incidents. Some parents will be attending." Karen's jaw tightened. "Of course," she said, then immediately turned away. By the time the final bell rang, the energy in the school had shifted again. Not everything had changed, but something had. That evening, Layla slipped off her shoes in the hallway and found a plain white envelope propped against her bedroom door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single folded page, the handwriting rounded and neat. "You're braver than you know. You helped all of us." She read it twice, then set it down on her desk. Outside, the trees were bare, the wind cold. But inside, something quiet had begun to grow. Under the soft lights of the winter showcase, Layla stood beside her poster that read, "Bias is a blindfold we choose to wear." The school lobby was almost unrecognizable. Strings of soft white bulbs lined the ceiling, casting a gentle glow across a dozen display tables. The tall Christmas tree in the center shimmered with silver and blue ornaments, its lights reflecting in the polished floors of Lyndale Prep. Parents milled about in thick coats, clutching coffee cups and murmuring with interest at the student projects on display. Layla's table stood quietly near the windows, away from the main tree but in clear view of the entrance. Her project board was clean, bold, and direct. No glitter, no gimmicks. Just the title, a series of personal reflections, and a small printed photo, herself, speaking during Parents' Day, Danica visible just behind her. At the bottom of the poster, a simple sentence read, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just not shrink." She smoothed the edge of her sweater, a soft red knit her mother had chosen for the night. Her hair was tied low, neatly parted. A quiet confidence radiated from her stance, though her fingers still twitched slightly as each new adult approached. Emily's table was beside hers, but utterly different. Wires, graphs, and labeled speakers formed a miniature science station. The title read, "What We Don't Hear Still Matters." Throughout the evening, tiny vibrations from inaudible frequencies moved grains of sand on a plate, proving Emily's thesis. It wasn't subtle, but it was brilliant. Layla leaned over once during a lull and whispered, "It's perfect." Emily grinned. "Yours is better. Yours makes people feel." Across the room, Karen Millstone moved slowly between displays, clipboard in hand. She was dressed in a neutral gray blazer, her usual severity softened tonight. For most of the showcase, she had stayed at a polite distance. But as Layla spoke to a small group of parents about her project, describing how assumptions silence voices before they're even heard, Karen finally approached. Layla noticed her just as she was wrapping up a sentence about trust. Karen waited, then said, quietly, "Layla, I'm sorry. Truly, I didn't listen. But I'm learning." For a second, Layla blinked, caught off guard not by the words, but by the way they were said. Without defense, without excuse. She looked at Karen, then nodded. "Thank you. That matters." Karen didn't linger. She stepped back, then moved on, slower than usual. A step toward change, however small. The evening wore on with a calm warmth. At one point, Danica appeared behind the crowd, a soft smile on her lips. She didn't speak, didn't wave. She simply watched. It was the first time Layla had seen her mother look not just proud, but peaceful. The applause at the end of the night, after Layla's final talk, wasn't thunderous. But it was steady, long, and heartfelt. It was the kind of applause that carried weight. As the crowd thinned and the lights began to dim, Emily pulled off her name tag and leaned toward Layla. "You ready for next year?" she asked. Layla smiled. "Next year, we run the student paper. Let's start with stories that never got told." The applause had faded, but something deeper lingered, an awareness that rippled through every corner of that old school building. Layla hadn't shouted, and Danica hadn't demanded. They simply arrived, with truth and dignity intact. In a world quick to doubt the quiet, they proved that silence is not weakness, but the space where strength gathers. Justice didn't roar that day. It stood, calm and undeniable, in heels and a red sweater. And sometimes, the most powerful story is the one told in a whisper, because the right ears will hear it.